Good morning and welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Monday, March 2nd, 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, where we broadcast live from the great metropolis of Milwaukee, Wisconsin on the powerful Cobalt microphone, Monday through Friday, 11:30 to 12 Central Time. And we are now entering into year 4 of the broadcast. We're wrapping up year 3 this week, and it's been a 3-year anniversary of bringing critical thinking skills to the great marketplace of ideas so that when you see financial and economic headlines, you think deeper about what those headlines mean because the world is full of information. And of course, that ever increasing marketplace of ideas keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that's why it's important that we are here as a Christian broadcasting network. As you know, we've been broadcasting since 2006, and our ministry, our mission, our passion, and our goal, of course, is to bring the news and information of the day to that great marketplace of ideas from a Christian perspective. And that's what we do, and that's our ministry. If you'd like to help us in that ministry, you can go to worldviewfoundation.com and make a donation. Make a one-time donation, which is always appreciated and helpful, or you can sign up for monthly donations, and that has the added benefit of flattening our revenue curve a bit so we can better match costs to revenues and keep our content free of charge. As you know, we don't charge a paywall and there's no subscription fee. This message and this gift and this gospel is freely given, just like it was 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, where they were handing out the gospel message and they didn't charge an admission fee. Well, here we are 2,000 years later, and we're doing the very same thing, and we will continue to do that until the second coming. So it's very important. If you'd like to help us, you can go to worldviewfoundation.com, or on the bottom of the screen, www.foundation.com, takes you to the same place, or use the QR code. Take you right to the donation page, and you can help us keep this ministry free of charge and a very powerful voice in the global marketplace of ideas. I don't know if you watched us over the weekend with the Iran situation. We had some amazing coverage, and more and more we turned to worldviewtube.com first to see what's going on, breaking news, and we had some great coverage all weekend long about the situation, and we can do that because of donations and viewers such as yourself. So if you'd like to help, worldviewfoundation.com or www.foundation.com and make a donation. You can also go to do business with the companies you see advertising throughout the day on our network. As you know, we don't sell blocks of advertising time. We're not a commercial network in that respect. Rather, we partner with companies we know and trust, and when you do business with them, you buy their goods and services, then a small portion of the proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission, and that also helps us in our ministry. There's a third way you can help us out and also at the same time help yourself, and that is to subscribe to worldviewtube.com/vault. It's a product that we've developed and offer, and there's a little paywall. You do subscribe to this on a monthly basis, very reasonable fee. But if you subscribe to the Vault, you have access to all of Brandon Howe's ministerial works. He's written 15 books, events and conferences and seminars. All of that's digitally captured and now living in the Vault. So if you're looking for a place, an on-demand source of Christian information, and to be part of this ministry, you can do that by subscribing to the Vault. It'll help you, certainly. It'll help our network as well. And also keep in mind, if you subscribe for friends or relatives that you know who are struggling in life, you think, gee, somebody's struggling with life issues or financial issues or relationship issues, and think, well, what can I do to help that person out? Well, a gift subscription to the Vault gives them a year of access to amazing Christian content, a bigger church, a larger body, and that's a very helpful thing as well. So those are the 3 ways you can help. You can make a donation, really appreciate it. You can do business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day on our network, and you can subscribe to the Vault for yourself and your friends, and that's really would be a real blessing to this ministry, as well as the Vault being a blessing to you and your friends as well. So let's jump into the news, and of course we would be remiss if we didn't first talk about the Iran situation. And it's been a very complicated process. I mean, late last week, the United States finally decided to do what they should have done in 1979 when Jimmy Carter sold the Shah of Iran down the drain and allowed the Islamic Republic to emerge because his foreign policy was such that they didn't take these Iranian mullahs seriously. They thought, well, a theocracy is kind of an old school concept, and let's get rid of the Shah of Iran, and then these people will kind of be there for a while, and then Iran will emerge as something more modern. Well, that didn't happen. 47 years of terrorism and 47 years of global posturing and untold numbers of deaths from a regime that has been nothing but a source of international trouble since 1979 when the Shah of Iran was deposed and these folks took over. I was talking to somebody over the weekend, younger person, and they didn't grasp they didn't understand this simple concept back in the day. And I'm not talking about the 1800s here, I'm talking about 1979. Before 1979, if you were going to fly somewhere, you would go to the airport and park your car in the parking lot. You would walk in, you would buy a ticket, you would check your luggage, you would go up the escalator, walk over to the plane gate, sit down in the chairs and wait for the gate to open, and then you'd get on your plane and off you'd go. There wasn't a TSA. There wasn't a security system. You walked into the airport, you bought your ticket, you checked your bag, you walked to the gate, no shoes off, no metal detectors, no x-ray of your body, none of that stuff. It was a free country. It was a free world. But of course, with the turbulence, and it started really in 1972, in the Munich Olympics. It was a real tragic situation. The because of the oil embargo situation and heating up, the world became a very dangerous place. So we really look at the 1970s, not only from the Iranian Revolution, but prior to that, with the Gulf War, the Yom Kippur War, and all of the turbulence that built. All of that was funded for the most part by the Iranian regime, especially after 1979, because there was a constant threat to Western civilization. So when you think about it, since 1979, we've been living with a country that should have been dealt with in 1979. Now, keep in mind, if maybe you can remember, you scratch off the old memory cells and think about that we had the United States Marines that were captured in Beirut, and then there was all sorts of issues in the Middle East back in the day. A lot of that came from and was funded by this Iranian regime because for the first time, this radicalized Islam stepped into a governmental role. Now, we in the United States, of course, we live under the purview and benefit of our First Amendment. And the First Amendment of the United States Constitution grants 5 individual rights. And one of the big rights is the freedom of religion, which has been twisted terribly by the left, of course. But when you look at it, what it basically said is the United States government cannot establish a government supported religion, because we'd come from England with the Church of England, and you saw the Puritans split off and the separatists split off and landed Plymouth Rock. And you saw throughout Europe the Catholic Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire versus the Protestant world. And our founders were very careful in saying when you come to America, you can believe whatever you want to believe with respect to religion, or not at all. And it's okay because we're all going to coexist, and religion is not going to be front and center in the United States. We're not going to have a statewide Episcopal church as the Church of the United States government. We're not doing that, even though it's kind of strangely the National Cathedral in Washington is operated by the Episcopal Church. Do a nice job, beautiful place, must see. It's kind of an interesting thing for Catholics and Lutherans and others wondering how did they get that gig. But the point is, we don't have a state religion, and it's important to us because each of us has the ability and the freedom to worship God the way we see fit, and it's very important that we don't have this type of theocracy. Well, on the other side, in Iran, of course, we all know that this is a very, very strict theocracy, and of course, if you don't toe the line according to the Quran, you're going to pay the price one way or another. And you can see what has happened to the society, the deterioration of that society in the better part of 50 years. Now, keep in mind, before 1979 and going back into earlier periods of time, probably even defining it during the Ottoman Empire, Iran has been a very, very good friend of the United States. I mean, the Iranian people, the American people got along. We a lot of cooperation, a lot of work. The oil industry was developing. A lot of technology was traded back in the day, and there was really no hostility between the peoples of the United States and the people of Iran. But what created the hostility was this radicalized idea that one belief system required violence to interact, and that really has been a very damaging thing throughout the last 50 years. If you look at the history of the Middle East, it's very, very traumatic. And of course, within that culture, it's not just the them versus us. We are the new kids on the block, the Europeans migrating west to the American continent. But when we look back at the ancient rivalries of Shia Iran, which is a sect of Islam, and the Sunni sects in the Middle East, which are primarily the Arab countries, and then it gets real complicated after that. What you realize is that these are ancient dislikes that have been settling themselves out over the years. It was a big problem in the Ottoman Empire a long time ago. Nobody remembers that. But it's still playing out today. So when you look at the situation, the United States and Israel going in, what they're doing is trying to clean up a mess that should have been solved decades ago. But we never had a president strong enough to do that. And this is one of the big problems with Jimmy Carter. You know, he was a fine man, God rest his soul. But when you think about being a national leader, and when you look at the national leaders that we've had that have actually been able to move the ball and change the world, there have been exactly two of them since Jimmy Carter, and of course one of them was Ronald Reagan, and the second one is Donald Trump, because these leaders have tremendous courage, and they're willing to take the risk to do things that should have been done a long time ago. And that's basically what you're seeing is the dismantling of a regime that funds terrorism on a global basis for no other reason than an ideology that the vast majority of the world doesn't quite understand or care about. If you think about 1.5 billion Chinese people, they tend to focus themselves. It's not a religious society in China. The state Communist Party, they don't want that to become a thing. But when you think about traditional Chinese culture based in Confucianism and other Eastern thought, that's 1.6 billion people, and of course the Chinese have no tolerance for Islam in China. They simply don't. I mean, you look at the groups, the minority groups in the far it would be the far west of China. China gets blamed for persecution of these groups, and the same thing with India. When you think about India itself, and this is a very complicated situation because, of course, when the British controlled the Raj back in the day, and it was 1620 to 1949. 1947, 1949, when India became independent, they controlled the whole place. And of course, when they granted independence of India, they had to split Pakistan off because it was a concentration of Islam, and most of India is Hindu. And these things, we still see these battles today. So when you look at the Iranian situation and empowering with the ability to capture oil wealth and then funnel that into terrorist activities for decades that has killed millions of people globally. 9/11 was a tremendous example of how this ideology is you either do it our way or we're going to hurt you into submission and then you're going to do it our way. Well, President Trump is standing up to that. So, it's time. It is time to turn that off so that part of the world can decompress and join into a global society of 1.5 or 1.6 billion Chinese and almost 1 billion European Americans and South America and India and other places where we don't have this constant heartbeat of terror that is illogical in a world of 8 billion people. To have one group so angry and thinking they're going to dominate everybody, it's kind of a big ego thing. So it's really good to watch the political reshuffling, especially people of my vintage, because we lived through this. It's a big deal back in 1979, and of course throughout the 1980s and 9/11 and all of the all of the terrorist events and the terrible situations, it's time to cool that down. And that's why when you look at the people supporting the efforts in the Middle East to effectively neutralize this regime and bring forth from the Persian people an amazing culture, it's truly an amazing culture. If you liberate them and allow that to prosper, it would be a wonderful place. The world would be a much more beautiful place if the deep and rich traditions of Iran could come forth outside of this suppressing ideology that is so damaging to culture and the human experience. And we'll see what happens. But of course, the economic perspective is what we talk about on this show. This is not a political show per se, but I think when you look at the big interest in the Middle East, you could gloss over the theological, you can gloss over the political, but what you can't gloss over from an economic perspective is the Middle East oil, and that is what everybody's worried about today. And it's been fascinating, as you know. I spend a lot of time on X looking and having discussions with a lot of very intelligent people from different perspectives. And some of the stuff I'm seeing is just sort of just amazes me that you really don't know. Media is a propaganda tool. That you really have to understand that when media emerged in the 1930s with radio and the fireside chats, and we have nothing to fear but fear itself. The President of the United States, for the first time, being able to talk to all Americans through radio for the first time, e pluribus unum, and then of course bringing in television so you can see who's talking to you. That's even more exciting. What you realize is that this is a magnificent tool to sway public opinion. So if you're an anti-Trump person, oh, you want to get out here and tell all the horror stories, oh, the world's going to collapse, the sky's going to fall, it's going to be terrible. And then, of course, if you're pro-Trump, then you get out here and you know all the great things that are going to come of this. You have to understand when you're watching media that this is the formula. It was the same formula with John Morrow back in the 1940s, the great war correspondent, and then the emergence of the big three, suits and ties. That's the way it is, America. Well, it's not the way it was. That's the way they wanted you to think it is. To today, which we have this digital media, or anybody, including me, you pick up a microphone and a camera, and off you go into that great marketplace of ideas to share ideas. So that's why it's important to do some critical thinking. And of course, one of the big things we hear is that Iran is shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Well, if you look at the map in the Middle East, you realize that a lot of the oil refineries are on the coast of that very interesting body of water that tightens at the Strait of Hormuz and then empties out into the Indian Ocean. And of course, the story is that the Iranians are being blown to, their armaments and their military capacity is being reduced hourly as we speak, are somehow able to close this like 20-mile wide Strait of Hormuz. And that means that the oil that's being refined and natural gas, liquefied gas, can't get through the strait and out into the global market. Therefore, there's going to be a 20% shortage of natural gas and oil. And of course, the oil markets will collapse and the sky will fall and this and that. Well, those are the stories that were coming out all weekend. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the markets today, I was looking before we went live here. The reality is that 20% of anything in a global market is significant, but it's not material. So when you look at the fact that, first of all, they may not have the capacity, the military capacity left to do much of anything by tonight or tomorrow morning. But at the end of the day, if they shut off 20% of the oil, and of course the United States has just befriended Venezuela, and which is the largest known reserve of oil on the planet. It's bigger than Saudi. It's big. It's huge. And of course, now that we're dearest of friends, if you are China or anyone else and you can't get your oil boats coming out of the Strait of Hormuz on this side of the globe, you can conveniently do business with Venezuela or Texas or Indonesia. They produce a lot of oil there. And lo and behold, the markets adjust. So there's really no sense of panic, but it was very interesting to see in this social media how the fearmongers just came screeching forth and saying, this is a terrible war to have because the global economy will crater and crash. And it didn't. It really didn't. Even gold. Now, gold is up to 53.21 an ounce today. That's up a little over $100 an ounce. Whenever you have military disturbance of this scale, people will flock to safety. So you can see sort of a run to safety. But I would suspect that you're going to see gold prices soften by the end of the week. And certainly oil has not exploded in price the way everybody thought Monday morning. You won't be able to buy a gallon of it. The reality is you have to let these things play out. And that's why you don't want to take financial bets on news, especially when the sky is falling crowd comes out and says, oh, this terrible stuff's going to happen, when in fact it never does. I mean, this is just the way the financial markets work. Because if you're a real financial player and you're investing other people's money at scale, you have very sophisticated models, but you're not going to read some headline or some post on X and then push the sell button or buy button. You're not going to do that. You're going to do, and frankly, you model for these contingencies. If you're managing billions of dollars of other people's money and you're not modeling for a Middle East war or the Strait of Hormuz to shut down, you're not. That's not a fiduciary place you'd like to be, because you have a responsibility to do that. That's why we're not seeing the bad news that was projected all weekend long. And this is going to be World War III and all that stuff. What it will do is if it is executed properly and neutralizes a very great threat and liberates 88 million Iranians so that they can become just joyful members of the human race and human society, not living under an oppressive situation, that's a good thing for the world, because the Iranian people are very smart, they're very cultured. It's a 6,000-year-old, probably one of the oldest cultures on earth. And to liberate that, it becomes a beautiful addition to humankind. So we're kind of rooting that these people are freed so that they can become not only free as an economy, but also take their place in the globe as traditional and cultural leaders, as they've been for 6,000 years. Okay, I've got to take a break here. I'll be right back. We'll talk about some more news. Hold on.
We have a big announcement, folks, something we've been waiting on for several months, and it's now here. It's called Bella Melt. You were on it for just 1 week when you lost 3 pounds. So in the first week, you lost 3 pounds on this, right?
That is correct.
Your GLP-1 is a natural hormone that's in every single one of our bodies. And your GLP-1 lets you know if you're full. It's a satiety hormone. So when your GLP is working properly, it does help suppress your appetite as well as reduce those cravings. It's a sugar-free fast melt caramel. So what it's going to do best is it's going to reduce your sugar cravings or any other cravings you have in your body. It's going to suppress that appetite. But where Melissa got the most benefit, I think, over the last week was the L-carnitine. The L-carnitine tells your mitochondria, this is where we talked about it before, this is where you produce energy in your cells. It actually tells those mitochondria to burn fat for fuel. We're noticing other people losing up to 7 pounds in the first week. 4 pounds has been about the average. As you lose weight and as you take these Bella Melts, it's going to help lower that blood sugar in your body as well.
All the information is there. MelissaHouseBG.com, MelissaHouseBG.com. Just now introducing for the first time Bella Melt with GLP-1 Fast Action.
Okay, welcome back. So I was just wrapping up talking about the Iranian situation. One issue to watch, and this is probably a little bit serious for the Europeans, is that a lot of liquefied natural gas is produced in that region and does come out of the Strait of Hormuz. Europe depends a lot on natural gas because of its own its own decisions. They did it to themselves, and liquefied natural gas is a greener fuel, of course, than burning coal. And if that supply is constrained, then it will affect the localized market, and that's what the Europeans will experience, for a short-term interruption. But I can assure you, Europe, you need not lose sleep one bit, because in Texas we are making a lot of natural gas, liquefied natural gas, and we will sell you every BTU you could possibly want. So it's good for one side, not good for the other. And that's another interesting thing. As the Middle East sorts itself out, there are a lot of Gulf states that are very obviously wealthy oil and gas producers, and they've got a lot riding on this duke 'em up. But the reality is, until the Sunni Shia situation is decided, and it may never be decided. I think the second coming will still be arguing, or they'll be arguing, we'll be in heaven. The point is, that's a battle that needs to sort itself out, and there's a lot of pushback because you've got the Iranian mullahs control, and that's one sector, but the rest of the people are on the other side. And this is a situation that's going to sort itself out. And, it could be that the Middle East oil and gas production is hampered for a very long time, at which point Venezuela prospers and Indonesia prospers and good old Texas prospers and other places that make oil and gas and sell oil and gas will do quite well as that market shorts out, because it's a 20% of the market, and markets tend to self-correct. If you lose 20% of the supply, well, the supply chains adjust globally, and you'll find other places. Will it be as cheap? Who knows? It depends. It depends on the supply. If you can ramp up supply and other producers, then maybe 20% is eaten up by the rest of the world, and the Middle East stops selling oil and gas. Maybe they destroy all their equipment and go back to living in the Stone Age, and that's the end of it. Okay, I also want to talk about one story that was very relevant, and as you know, I've been on a roll here with these data centers. I'll be doing a very important conference this week dealing with some of the regulatory and legal issues that are emerging as we speak concerning the development of these massive data centers, because they are a thing unto themselves. And if you've watched my prior shows, you can see them in the vault. If you subscribe to the vault, you can watch my reruns. What you realize is that there aren't enough electrons to power all of the data centers that are being developed. And that means we have to increase the amount of generation, electricity generation, and then, of course, transmission to get the power to the plants. Well, as part of this Iranian situation, there's a story that came out, very interesting, that in the United Arab Republics, which is one of the Gulf states on the Gulf, a data center was taken out, and it happened to be running, I believe, AWS system, which is important because a lot of big governments and big companies run off of Amazon servers. It's huge. It's just a big deal. So it raises another interesting issue with respect to the development of data centers, especially in our neighborhoods, that if these things become critical infrastructure and they're privately owned and privately developed, they're not being developed the same way that a hardened military base would be developed or any other critical infrastructure federal base would be developed. They're basically commercial establishments sitting in a suburban community. So it begs the question. Now, we don't expect to see Iranian drones flying over Port Washington, Wisconsin anytime soon. But when you think about it, if this becomes part of the targeting for war planning and critical infrastructure decimation, so that you can take out the enemy's systems, then having a commercial data center becomes a risk to the community, and it's a risk that no mayor and no common council has ever thought about. Gee, if we build this big data center, we'll be collecting all these taxes, and we won't have all these expenses because there's nobody working in the thing. But nobody's thinking about, bombs or missiles or drones falling from the sky and blowing up the data center and half the town. And that is going to be something that we'll be addressing again this week, because this is new. When you start to target the data centers because they're so big and they're so obvious, then it becomes a bigger question. Will they also target the electrical grid? Now, we've been worried about terrorism on the electrical grid since back in the day when I was on the commission back in the 90s, and it's only gotten worse. With digital controls and digital technology and digital dispatch, it becomes not only a physical threat, but it's also a hacking threat. Can you hack your way into the system and turn it off? And of course, this raises that issue to a much more sensitive level, because if these become targets of violence or of war, then it not only puts the data at risk, which nobody knows who's buying the data anyway. It's making the data, and it costs a lot of money, a lot of heat, and a lot of energy to make the data. Somebody's buying it, somebody's using it. But then if the facility becomes a target in your community, then that puts your lives at risk in a way that you would not have thought about. I mean, nobody would when you move next to a military base, there's always in your head this idea that if somebody decides to fire a missile at the military base, it might hit my front lawn. Nobody thinks about that with a data center because we think about data as being quiet and happy and nice and invisible, just kind of runs in the background. But this demonstrates that data centers are becoming critical targets in a wartime, and it requires yet more thought as to whether developing these monstrous plants that take monstrous electricity is a good idea, especially when software technologies like Fractal and other technologies are coming forth, quantum hardware technologies that make these systems obsolete. So this is, again, a glimpse. We're watching a war situation. We're watching the effect on the economy, which right now we're not seeing much of an effect at all on the economy. And then we're starting to think about the critical infrastructure problem of having these plants in your backyard. And wow, that's something we're going to add to the debate. Okay, well, don't forget our $38.7 trillion national debt, which is something our Congress has given us in spades. And don't forget the $2.5 trillion in annual deficit they're running. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow and watch the Eastman Financial Report, as well as go to Worldview Foundation, and please support us by making a donation. Have a great afternoon. Keep everyone involved in your prayers. War is never a good thing. It's a terrible thing, but sometimes it's a thing that resets the borders, just like Winston Churchill did back in the day. Well, we're going to be rejuggling the borders again. So anyway, have a great afternoon. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35